before we dive in today, I just need to apologise for the quality of the audio. Something appears to have happened with my mic, and rather than waste this amazing conversation, I'm choosing to share it with you and hope that the sound isn't going to be too distracting for you and that you can listen in flow.
What does the word flow mean to you? Is it something that feels hard to attain, to achieve, to hold on to? Is it something that feels so familiar that the moment you hear the word, your body softens? Is it something that makes you curious? Something that you'd like to invite into your life a little bit more, perhaps? My guest today is Dr. Sue Jackson. She is a renowned psychologist and the author of the book Experiencing Flow: Life Beyond Boredom and Anxiety.
Welcome to the Henny Flynn podcast, the space for deepening self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach, and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you.
I'd just like to repeat that title. I think it's really inviting in so many ways. Experiencing flow, life beyond boredom and anxiety. You know, what a wonderful concept, that this unity between boredom and anxiety. And I've got a personal story around that, which may or may not come through when I'm talking with Sue, but it involves skiing. Anyway, she is a pioneering researcher on the concept of flow and closely collaborated with the founder of the flow concept. She's been working in this field for over 30 years, mainly in the domains of sport, business, education, but also daily life as well. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with her. And I think, if you're familiar with the podcast, then you'll know that this concept of flow is something which is really important to me personally, and particularly in relation to flow journaling. So I'm hoping at some point we'll be able to chat about that too. And I can see that Sue is in the waiting room, so I'm going to let her in. So, Sue, I am so delighted to welcome you here. And actually, just from the few minutes that we've been talking about some of the kind of logistics of how we do this conversation, I already have a sense that this is going to be a really beautiful conversation. I can feel the edges of flow already drifting, actually.
And that's nice. Thanks, Henny. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, it's wonderful. And I really, actually that conversation that we've just had about, do we do this just as a video? Do we do it with video as well? I'd love to hear again, sort of what you were just saying about how that can inform the way that we show up and how that informs the state of flow.
Sure. Well, I guess it's not everybody's experience, but like for me, I was just commenting that it's the end of the day here in Australia, and that I'm a little on the tired side, and that it's actually a relief to know that I don't have to put energy into the video side of things, because, as we'll talk about, one of the dimensions of flow is actually loss of self-consciousness. And I think, another option is that I take my own visual image out of the picture, which would be fine too. And then I don't have to worry about it. So that's another way, I guess, of dropping self-consciousness. But yeah, like we were just talking about how to have, a nice conversation, and we obviously both interested in flow. And so yeah, we can have the eye contact, which I think is important to like have a good conversation, but without having to sort of worry about the self-consciousness side of things that creeps in when you are looking at yourself,
Yeah,
basically.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's such a lovely observation, because it's also one of those things, because we're so used to this form of communication these days,
Mm,
you know,
we are, yeah.
since all the lockdowns and the pandemic,
Yeah,
that maybe we actually forget that there. Oh, there we go. I think we just sort of slightly had a hiccup in the connection between
yeah,
here and. Did you see that? Okay, we'll just carry on.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we'll just carry
and,
on.
and
That's just
again,
technology, right?
well, exactly. And I think that's also sort of one of the things, is sort of losing our attachment to things being perfect.
Yeah.
Again, that's also sort of part of what flow feels like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Perfectionism and flow don't go together.
Yeah. So there's something about that kind of acceptance of this is how it is.
Hmm.
And for you and I to have this conversation, the most important thing is that we're comfortable and that we're
Mm,
present. And
exactly.
that, so I think it was really interesting for me when I was looking at your book and recognizing, oh yeah, like I know these things innately. I know the truth of what your research is demonstrating. Um, and so I would love to kind of dive in actually and just talk about, well, what is flow? How do you describe what flow is?
Yeah, and I'm also interested to hear how you do, because I know you've recently written a book on a flow journal. I'm interested to learn more about that, Henny. So I recently published a book in June, so I think just after yours, perhaps. And it's called Experiencing Flow: Life Beyond Boredom and Anxiety. And it outlines a journey that I've taken with flow since I first learnt about it in my graduate studies in North America when I was studying at the time sports psychology. And I came across this book on flow, and it was called Life Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, written by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's his first book where he describes this experience. And I was like, yeah, I've had that experience, and yet I didn't know there was a language around it. And so the book is really about trying to continue the legacy of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, or Mike's work, since his death a couple of years ago, because I think it's such a valuable concept, such a valuable psychological state for us to understand, and to understand that it is accessible, as I'm sure you are well aware.
Absolutely. I love that the sense of accessibility. There was a line in your book which I think, which I'm not sure whether that it's a line that Mike coined or it's something that's come from your observations, your research, but it's this line that flow is the space where time and effort cease to exist.
Mm,
And
yeah,
even
that's a good description of flow.
just saying those words,
Mm,
I feel in my system everything softens, settles,
mm,
because the hard edges of time constraints and the hard edges of effort melt,
mm,
and we can
that's exactly
simply
right.
be.
Yeah, well, you've just described a couple of the characteristics of flow, which is this sense of time changing in our perception, and also that concentration becomes more effortless. And I think that's kind of the maybe the signature characteristic of flow, is the sense that you can focus on what you're doing without it requiring a lot of effort. Now, it is requiring effort, because to stay focused on a task does. But in flow, we're bringing all of our attention to what we're doing. And so then we drop some energy that we might otherwise give to self-consciousness, for example, like we talked about a minute ago, or to like the passing of time, and how long has this gone, how much longer is it going, what's happening after this, and so on and so on. So that some of those sort of ways in which we tend to operate in the world drop away because all of our attention is on what we're doing as we're doing it. Yeah, so it's a mindful approach, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I've got strong sort of Buddhist principles, drifting through everything as I listen to you.
Yeah, well, please share them, please. So,
Well, I mean, this sort of state of being with what is, this
yeah.
willingness to be in the present moment, rather than the learned behaviors, beliefs, attitudes that often we can have, which is that we have to be kind of always on and always alert to everything that's around us.
And always thinking about something.
Always thinking about something. So my background includes 20 years in a senior corporate job in
Yes.
financial services, very very head oriented, very much that kind of always on, always alert. This this attitude of being in that environment was very much that it was rewarded when you were multitasking. It was,
oh, I know.
oh, I know.
I grew up in that era too, and being women, we're supposed to be expert at multitasking, right? And not that men don't do it well too. I'm sure if they're taught that it's important, and we definitely were in the 80s. It was like how to be effective, how to be efficient, multitask, as in learn to be constantly distracting yourself.
Exactly. And there's a book actually that springs to mind, which is called I Don't Know How She Does It, which I think came out maybe in the early 2000s. I think so. My son was born in 2001, and I think it was kind of one of those books that was about here's how to be a modern woman, to juggle work and children potentially, and relationships and family systems, and all of that stuff.
Really? It was saying that was a good way to be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I love that. So it's like, really?
Yeah, that must have been enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. And this idea that that it's possible to exist like that. And actually,
Well, you can exist like that, but it's about the quality of the experience. And that's something that Mike, and just for the listener, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is the person, the psychologist and the great thinker who founded the concept of flow, Hungarian born, and for ease of accessibility was known by Mike. So when we talk about Mike, we're talking about Mike Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, but he would always focus on how important the quality of our experience is. That was what was behind his researching flow and creativity and how to live a good life.
And it feels to me that one of the most significant distinctions here is operating on the surface of things, which is it's almost like the inverse of the image of the duck, paddling furiously under the water. It's almost like actually when we're multitasking,
yes,
our feet are up,
it's all up here.
paddling furiously,
but probably drowning at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, I've literally never had that sort of image before, but it feels really resonant with how things felt for me at that time.
Yeah. No, I distinctly remember learning about multitasking and, through self-help, through reading, through media, and how it was the way forward and how we have so much to do. So you better get good at juggling multiple things at one time. And I just made the comment about differences between men and women because it was perpetuated at the time, for whatever truth lies behind it, that women were better at it. So let's get them to do the multitasking.
And what's the reality, Sue? With all of your research, what's your observation about the effectiveness of multitasking?
Multitasking basically, as you would be well aware, Henny, teaches us to be distracted. And being distracted in an ongoing way is stressful. It's unfulfilling. It's not enjoyable. And also it's not that productive. And research would suggest that, in terms of brain research, that we don't multitask between one or more complex tasks. We're basically brain switching. So we're switching focus constantly. So we're teaching our brains to constantly shift focus rather than to sustain focus. And if we don't sustain focus, we will not find flow.
Mm.
As I'm sure you well understand, because as I said, I'm also curious, as we talked about having a conversation around flow, and hopefully the listeners that are interested in flow might gain something from hearing both of our experiences on that.
I mean, I really want to sort of give some space actually to what you just said about, if we're constantly distracting, we won't create the conditions where we can experience flow. And my reflection there is, I wonder how much this almost sort of obsession with the value of multitasking may have contributed to what we see more and more now about the very, very short little span of attention that we have when we pick up our phone. We don't even know we're doing it, and I observe it in myself. I'll be halfway through something and find my phone and just think, what am I doing?
I totally understand. And people can't see my room, but I have two computer monitors, a laptop, a mic, a phone, which I have put on silent and do not disturb. I have an iPad there as well. It just goes on and on and on. And that's the world we're increasingly living in. And we're not going to be probably moving away from that anytime soon. And so technology allows you and I to talk right now, which is amazing. And technology is also a major source of distraction. And I think that's particularly concerning for young people whose lives and social lives often operate that way. In terms of, we see a rise in reported ADHD, people having problems paying attention. Well, that seems to have coincided with this increasing reliance on technology and the fact that social media is all about designing, platforms so that you will get a new image every few seconds and you'll jump from one thing to another and you'll get alerts and notifications. And it's all about distractibility, really.
Yeah, and it's, and the people who are creating these apps and, sort of social media, that they're really good at their job. And so, and as humans, it's like a little, we know it's like a little dopamine hit, isn't it? It's like, oh, something new, oh, something new, something new. And even just sort of when we think about that, it keeps us up in this upper level. And what we're looking to do, I think, is drop down. And you've sort of said about the work that I do, and for me, that word flow has been particularly resonant around journaling and the way that I have come to relish my own journaling practice and the way that I now teach others, and the book that I wrote, which is In the Flow, Journal Your Inner Wisdom. And for me, the experience is a dropping down. It's a dropping down into my body, where rather than journaling, from a kind of highly sort of cognitive and analytical place up in my head, I'm writing as a stream of consciousness, which feels like it's coming from my belly rather than, and the experience is absolutely one where time loses its context. So I could write for a very short amount of time, or I could write for much longer, and both would feel equally valid. and the normal rules of writing don't apply as well. So for me, like one of the things that I unlearned was the rules that I'd picked up about how to write well at school. So when I'm journaling, I don't use paragraphs. For me, it kind of breaks the flow. Um, and the experience is very often when I get to the end, I I don't always reread it immediately. In fact, very often I don't reread it. I kind of allow the words just to fall on the page and shut the book. But when I return to it, I'll often be surprised by what's appeared because it feels like it's coming from another part of me,
Okay.
another place.
And
And
do you encourage people to handwrite versus type?
yes, I
And
do
that's
encourage
there's a
people
reason for
to,
that.
because
Yeah.
it feels then it's a somatic
Mm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it engages whole. I think, obviously for some people, handwriting is really unfamiliar
Mm-hmm.
and then it's like, well, even more delicious, break some of those boundaries of the familiar and see how it is. It feels very experimental. And I
Okay.
think again for me, that sort of sense of flow is it sort of comes back to what we were saying before. It's like it is what it is. So allow this experience to just to be. So allow the words to fall on the page without editing, without um,
Sure.
judging.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been sort of reflecting on what is it that really helps me achieve a sense of flow when I'm writing a book or when I'm writing
Mm-hmm.
podcast episode, for example, if I'm doing a solo
Mm.
episode.
Mm. Yes.
And it is this sense of like being willing to sink into myself, because when I'm up in my head, it will not feel as authentic as when I'm down in my body.
Mm.
That's my observation.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
I,
And like I think we both have a particular interest in mindfulness, and that's obviously a way of helping us to connect
mm,
body and mind. And in my book, I write quite a bit about relationships between mindfulness and flow. As you know, mindfulness has been a great pathway to access this optimal state of flow because we are getting out of our head and we're focused, but we're focused on the task and we're letting go of these other unhelpful things that often accompany us when we're doing things, particularly in the performance setting. So I work in performance psychology, and a lot of the clients that I work with, they're high performing clients, and being able to let go of some of those expectations and the self-consciousness and the sense of performance being evaluated and them being evaluated and so on, so that they can do their task more effectively, but also enjoy it, like just taking away some of the stress,
mm,
um, so that people that are high performers tend to have gotten into that area through some sort of love, intrinsic motivation for that, whatever that is, whether they're a sports performer, a musician, uh, someone's profession, they've got a particular interest and they develop it. So being able to sort of touch into what that is when you're doing your best work, which I think is what flow helps us to do.
mm. And that I love that point that you just made about it comes back to the self-consciousness, but also the kind of the the questioning about um uh almost like the kind of performance anxiety that can come
Mm.
in anything that we're doing, whether
Mhm.
we're an elite athlete or my husband changed the taps on our kitchen on our bathroom sink yesterday, and I think if I just really, he won't mind me talking about this, if I think how he might have approached that in the past,
Mhm.
it would have been a much more stressful activity. He'd have been he'd have been more judgmental of himself. He'd have and therefore worried more about whether or not he had the skills to get it right, and therefore that kind of place,
Yes.
inner critic, all of that. He might have made certain assumptions about his ability to get it right, and therefore, uh, almost invited in opportunities for it to go wrong. This
Yeah, we can do that so easily, can't
so
we?
easily. Whereas this time, what I observed was he just he without pressing at it, he just understood what needed to be done,
Hmm.
trusted his own
Hmm.
judgment, and then observed the steps that he needed to take,
Mm.
followed them. And for me, that feels like flow as well.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Okay, great.
Yeah, because flow can occur. I've just mentioned like high performers and and like flow can definitely occur in those situations, but flow can occur in daily living tasks. And Mike wrote about that in a book called Finding Flow: The Psychology of Engagement with Everyday Life, published in 1997, and in other writings as well. And he and people from around the world looking at people in different cultures as well, different sort of ways of living, have explored this time of flow when you get absorbed in what you're in, and what you referred there to in terms of the example with your husband was he had skills and he trusted those skills, and that's central to the flow model is a relationship between a challenging situation and your skills, and your in particular your perception of your skills. So when you've got that balance right, so you're challenging yourself but you bring an appropriate skill set and you trust that skill set, then you can focus on the task. So I think that's a really great way, if people want to understand flow, to recognize that's actually the operational definition of flow that Mike often used was it's a challenging activity that you bring a skill set to, and that like the relationship is such that the challenges are just slightly above the skills.
Oh, I absolutely love that, because I think if one is not really, really curious about this state or hasn't necessarily noticed it in oneself, it can be easy to dismiss a concept like flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as being like too passive or a bit too woolly. I don't know. A bit like if something isn't hard, it doesn't have value. There can be that sort of concept. Whereas I love what you just said about it's this idea that we're just pushing
Pushing
ourselves
back.
enough,
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
so much that we
Yes.
slip into anxiety. And that's the
That's
between
it.
boredom and anxiety thing, isn't
That's
it?
it. That's the bit about beyond boredom and anxiety. And that's what intrigued me was when I saw the title of that book on a university bookshelf when I was researching my master's at the time. I was like, well, what lies beyond boredom and anxiety? And it just like took my interest, you know. And so boredom sets in if our skills outweigh the challenges and we don't have new challenges to keep us interested. On the other hand, what we tend to experience perhaps more of, but I guess everyone's situation is different, is that we have challenges and we don't necessarily trust ourselves. We don't trust our skills. And so instead of being focused, we're anxious about, is this good enough? Am I good enough? And, you know, that just gets us into our heads. And once we're there, we're no longer engaged in what we're doing, are we? So,
Oh, honestly, I've shared this story I'm about to share with you with others, and
mm,
no
okay.
one's really understood, but I sense that you will absolutely get it. And actually, it's making sense for me now. This
Mm,
so a few years ago, we went skiing, and
mm,
I'd never skied before, or maybe like a tiny little bit, but not really. And
Hmm.
everybody else was reasonably competent. So they went off and I had some lessons. And
Yes.
I was absolutely fine with the instructor. And they basically said, look, you're great. You know, you're good enough. Like you could go, you
I've
can
been
go.
there, done that.
Yeah, been there. So I head up on the butt lift on the ski slope and I just thought, okay, I'm gonna get off at the first stop and I'm just
Hmm.
gonna redo this run a few times
Hmm.
that I've done with the instructor.
Hmm.
I get off, I stand at the top, I'm feeling okay, and I start going down and I get lower and lower and lower to the ground because I'm more and more terrified, which means I get faster and faster. My skis
You're a
great.
bomb.
Literally no idea how I'm going to stop when I get to the bottom, and I'm by falling over. And I thought, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I go back up. I do it again. I get to the bottom. Pretty much the same thing happens. I take my skis off. I go back in the lift down to the village at the bottom of the mountain. I take it all back to the shop, and the guy said, are you sure you've only just hired it? And I said, absolutely. I found skiing to be a weird combination of boredom and terror.
That's so funny. I can just picture you becoming a bit of a cannonball as you got lower and lower to the snow.
Fast. I was so fast. I'm a bit like that on a water slide as well, Sue. I just get terrified. I'm becoming like a bobsleigh team. But anyway,
I mean, that I would have hoped the ski instructor might have told you about turning your skis
oh,
and staying a little
he
bit more. He
he
did, just
totally
that.
told
Yeah.
me. I knew it all. But what had happened was the anxiety overcame,
Right.
but how
Yeah.
I translated it was boredom.
Okay.
I called
Right.
it
It's just like
being
get out of
boring.
this totally. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think so for me, it was like the antithesis of flow. Whereas I know so many people who see skiing as being like the epitome of flow.
Mm. Oh, totally. Yeah. So have you been back and skied again?
No,
Okay.
no. And I won't. I mean, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure it won't
Okay.
happen.
Yeah,
But
and it might not be skiing's your thing, but
I did do.
definitely sports like skiing and surfing would be another one. Climbing, rock climbing, and so on. Like they are environmentally challenging, and you do need quite a high level of skills to approach it, but you also need trust. Like so, you need the knowledge, you need the skills, but you need to trust that you can make that turn and you can point your skis uphill and you'll slow down and so on. But like in those moments of terror, like we don't think that way at all.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? The bit that was missing was my trust in myself.
Yeah.
And and so I understand from my own like deep work that I've done on myself, the lack of trust in my like physical capability, particularly then, different now actually. It would be interesting to see what it might be
Okay.
like to ski now. But
Maybe you might want to go back and try
yeah,
it again.
maybe I do. Now I feel
Skis
like
are shorter these days. It's actually easier to ski. That's something that I think someone was pretty clever about making skis shorter from like I used to ski quite a bit in the 80s and the idea was you'd get longer and longer skis because then you could go faster and turn quicker and so on and so on um and that was fine if you're going to be a ski racer, but if you're just a recreational skier, and now it's gone the other way, like where skis are short, and so it's quite easy to turn those skis.
very good. I now feel like I'm having a session with sports psychologist, Dr. Sue.
And not a ski instructor. So don't take on board too much. If there's ski instructors out there, they might be saying, "What is she talking about?"
You mentioned earlier about you when you came across Mike's book, you
Hmm.
recognized that you had experienced the state of.
That's it. Yeah.
Can you share that story?
Yeah, well, so in Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, Mike shares interviews he did with people in quite different contexts, including some athletes, musicians, chess players, and surgeons. And so there's a chapter like devoted to these different settings and this consistency of when one was totally focused on whatever one's activity was, a chess player or a surgeon during a procedure, there was these similarities of characteristics that then Mike developed into what are known as the 9 dimensions of flow, which are outlined in my book and in Mike's writings. And so for me, like having grown up an athlete and just loved sport all my life, you know, I knew those times, but I just thought it was random good luck if it had happened. You know, that everything seemed to come together. It was much more effortless than what it normally was. And I tended to perform at a higher level. And I was just like, remember those times as being, you know, really enjoyable times. But I didn't know that I had anything to do with whether I achieved it or not, you know. And through Mike's contribution, which is, you know, a reason, as I said, for writing this book is so that people understand just how important the flow concept is, because there are ways, if we understand flow, then we can find ways, psychological strategies, for example, to make it more likely that we can experience it. So it doesn't have to be, oh, that was a randomly good day or a randomly bad day. Like, that we can, and that's, I guess, what performance psychology or sports psychology, initially the area that I was working in, is all about. It's about teaching individuals and groups that we can all improve our psychological skill set that we bring to the tasks that we engage in, that we choose to take part in. We can all improve in that area, no matter where we're at. And even the athletes at the very top of their sport, they often they they might even be presenting themselves as being full of confidence, and often are, but they also are sometimes doubting themselves, but trying as best as they can to hide that, because, you know, as the skill level increases, the challenge increases. So there's always that sense of uncertainty, that sense of doubt, that can creep in. And so it's learning how to stay focused, how to notice when attention has wandered and bring it back, which, as we would both agree, mindfulness meditation is an excellent way to learn how to do that better. And basically to notice if our attention is on task or not, because we develop the self-awareness through the mindfulness practice that we might not have had prior, to actually recognize that we're just caught up in all of these thoughts about what happened and the injustice of it, or what might happen and how terrible that would be. And, you know, we can go through life that way.
I think there's something about this, how to recognize when we're drifting, when our attention is drifting off task. And something that I've you know, for me is, you know, was really important when I learned this, and that I will sort of teach others so I also teach sort of mindfulness practices as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is that meditation is not about the empty mind and the perfect, you know,
Yeah.
place of, you know, nirvana. It's about
Yeah.
the moment where you go, oh,
Yes,
oh,
there
I
I am again.
drifted.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we're looking for, and I think that feels really,
Exactly right.
really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a misconception about meditation that I think, with the growth of mindfulness and its recognition as being a very valuable skill, is hopefully being quashed, this idea that, oh, you it's about getting an empty mind, and then what might be put into that empty mind, you know. It's just like, yeah, it's not what it is at all. Like, you know, the more you meditate, the more you notice how much your mind wanders and that you have to work hard to bring it back. Well,
And
that's what I find anyway, like for myself.
absolutely, and that it's okay. It's very
It's
human
okay.
that your
Yeah.
mind has wandered, and the gift, the joy is in noticing it and still loving yourself through that. So
Hmm.
I kind of feel that you'll have seen, I think, that all of my work is about this grounding in self-compassion.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
And that, as Richard Bach said, we teach what we most need to learn. That
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. Yeah.
my recognition that for a lot of my life, self-compassion was pretty absent, and that for me, that is also part of flow. So
Mm-hmm.
when I notice that I am drifting, I notice I've picked up my phone
Yes.
halfway through something,
Mm.
rather than beat myself up about it, in the moment of noticing, actually saying, oh, okay, I've noticed, I'll put it down, or I've noticed and I'll carry on. And either both of those are equally okay because I'm making an active choice in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, and then
Mm-hmm.
make a choice to return to whatever the task is. But
Yeah, that makes good sense.
yeah, and so I think that feels very resonant with me. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask you is, um, so I notice that when I create certain conditions around me, flow feels more not acceptable, more accessible. And
And what are those conditions?
so one would be music.
Okay.
So a technique that I use a lot is I'll find a piece of music on Insight Timer, the
Hmm.
meditation app.
Yeah, I also use and I'm on it. Yeah.
You're on it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm gonna come and find you. So I will find a piece of music that is the length of time that I want to focus on the task,
Mm-hmm.
and I will play that piece of music, and I find through a kind almost like a Pavlovian response, I drop in
Okay.
and I can pay attention to that one thing. And I just wonder whether that's something you've come across, or if there are other sort of lovely sort of techniques or tools that
Mm.
people could experiment
Mm.
with.
Yeah, well, definitely there is some research on music and flow and how it can be enhancing of flow. But what also you were describing there is one of the preconditions of flow, which is having clear goals. So like you set a time that you want to practice for. And so you don't have to then be thinking about how much time is passing because you're getting immediate feedback, which is another precondition to flow about, yes, this is what I'm doing right now. This is what I chose to do and so on. And then the challenge skill balance. So that's the third precondition.
So the third precondition again,
The challenge skill balance.
can I just go, okay,
Yeah,
so
so like what we talked about with the challenge skill balance, well, it's actually the first precondition, but then clear goals and then the unambiguous feedback or the immediate feedback that you're getting.
yeah,
So yeah, music is definitely a cue for many people, and choosing the music that is the one that you're going to resonate with. But what you were describing to me was about having a clear goal in that activity that you wanted to engage in, and then you're receiving that feedback while the music's playing.
so I loved this in your book. I loved the way that you talked about goals in the book, because
Okay.
for me, I shy away. So I'm, on the coaching end of the
Hmm.
sort of
Sure.
spectrum. Um, and often in coaching, what is the primary concern is like, what's your goal?
Hmm.
Now, I often find that goals can be double-edged swords, and I tend
Mm.
not to. talk about them, and I'll say, like, what's the outcome you'd like to move toward, or how do you want to be feeling at the end of this? Now that
Okay.
is a goal, but it's a softer edged thing, and also it opens up the opportunity that it might change as you move toward it. And one of
And
the
that's goals in flow. It's not about like these specific outcomes. It's about, as Mike described it, it's about knowing moment by moment what it is that you want to be doing, that you've chosen to be doing, and then the feedback is letting you know, okay, so this, my goal is to be meditating and allowing the music to help me to get into that space. And so I'm getting feedback about that because I'm listening to the music. So my sense of hearing and so on is attuned to the music, and what other senses you might be paying attention to during that practice. And so, yeah, it's not about setting a goal that you work towards and is inflexible and never changes. And if you don't meet the goal, it's a failure. Like that's not it. I mean, that's not effective goal setting in any sense. But like in relation to flow, it's about more a moment by moment, knowing what it is that's important for you.
I think what I read in the book was something like that. It's the goal of the purpose of the process, like that the
Yes.
I think I might even have made a yeah, you said not about outcomes, but about process and the
Process. Yeah.
clarity of purpose. And that
Mm,
really resonated because it just felt like a much more adult way of seeing the task in hand rather
mm,
than, like you say, something that has a kind of binary outcome. You either achieved and
achieve it or you didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely process goals are the way to go. And various psychology researchers have written about that in terms of growth mindset or mastery orientation. So being focused on the process versus the outcome.
Yeah, it's not the destination, it's the glory of the ride.
That's a nice one. The glory.
The glory of the ride.
The
Um,
glory of your ride down the ski slope.
yeah, exactly. Or well, maybe one day too. Maybe you might have inspired a little neural shift in my head. I one of the things sort of we kind of draw to a close. I knew this was going to happen. I mean, this is flow, isn't it? We could sense
Yeah.
we could talk
Yeah.
about this
Yes.
for a
Just
long time. But
whenever you want to talk, it's fine. Like I'm good.
okay, well, maybe we come back to this topic again one day.
Maybe. Maybe.
So, but I really wanted to just pay some tender attention to the way that you talk about Mike and
Mm,
the influence that he's had on you. Just
mm.
felt really important that he is honored in this conversation.
For sure. Well, that's why I wrote the book, to honor his work and him as a person, like he was as his students. And there's examples of things that some of his students have written in the book. He was the best example of what he worked in and what he wrote about. And so, yeah, like I just highly encourage anyone that's at all sparked their interest in flow to look up Csikszentmihalyi. It's very phonetic but difficult to spell, and or just look up flow, and to read some of Mike's works because yeah, there's certainly a lot of really wise and wonderful thinking in there. And yeah, so my book is I co-authored a book with Mike in 1999, Flow in Sports, with a shared interest of flow in the sporting area for both of us, and that was what my PhD was on, and he was one of the mentors to my work at that time. And yeah, so that was designed towards performance, and this book is more about the flow experience and why the flow experience matters, and according to what Mike taught me about why it matters, which is equally, if not more, about the quality of experience as it is about any performance outcomes. So I distinctly remember reading that in his writings quite a bit. He was concerned about how to help people live the best life they could, having come through war as a child and experienced the horrors of war in Europe, and was very motivated to find ways for people to be able to live a life where quality of experience mattered, and that recognizing that you can do something about what your quality of experience is, even in times of adversity.
Amazing, amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, there's so much meaning in the way that you speak about him, and I can hear, you know, how inspiring he was for you, and I'm sure everyone that he taught and worked with. So yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah.
So much for sharing
Yeah.
that, Sue. And
Yeah, no, thank you.
I will share, obviously I'll share a link to your book in the notes, just so everyone knows that they can come and have a look at your work. And also I'll share Mike's name fully
That's a
spelled.
great idea.
I love the fact that phonetically it's Csikszentmihalyi. I mean, just,
Yeah.
you know, what a gorgeous
I
phonetic name. And there's one last question that I'd like to ask you, which is something that I ask all of my clients actually, before we start working together, and something I like to ask my guests. So, if you saw this time in your own life right now as a chapter in your book of life, what would your chapter heading be?
What would the chapter, what was the question?
If you saw this time in your life as a chapter in your book of life, what would the chapter heading be?
Oh, the chapter heading. Wow. I think revisiting what matters.
Oh, that's nice. Can you say what the subheading might be underneath that?
Yeah, well, I spent many years in academia because I enjoyed research and writing, and I wanted to do that in the area of flow. But I didn't actually find it a very rewarding experience a lot of the time. I mean, not all of the time, but not a lot of the time. And so then when I shifted into why I initially studied sports psychology, which was to work with performers and to try to help people maximize their optimal mindset, optimize their experience, enjoy what they're doing more, be less stressed about it. Like, I guess that's what I've come full circle towards doing at this later stage of my career. And I'm glad that I did. And I'm glad that I got back to writing because I always have loved reading. Like I talked about being an athlete and finding flow in sport, but also as a young person in reading and reading fiction, that like I'd read a book and finish it and then I'd start it again and I'd just like get totally absorbed in yeah. So like Watership Down, for example, like I had to sticky tape the front and back cover because it was like just kept getting turned so many times. Yeah, and then that would lead me to like tap into imagination and creativity, you know, a book like Watership Down, for example, and so I see myself in the story and so on. And yeah, so like and that's like you're getting totally absorbed in what you're doing. Yeah. And then I could find that sometimes in writing, but only if I was writing something that I really cared about. And I guess flow, something that I've always cared about since I learnt about it. And so writing this book has been many years in the making, as a thought, but you know, finding time to do it and then deciding, yeah, it matters enough that I'm going to do it, and I'm glad that I did make the time to do so.
Yeah, me too, because it's led to this conversation, and that for me,
Yeah, yeah,
part of watching the flow of flow, how where it sort of takes us to the place.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I'll have to get hold of your journal and try that. Because I've always liked writing, including journaling, and so I'd like to experiment with that as well.
Well, a little bit of sort of insight, personal insight from me is that when the book was published, obviously I'd written the book
Hmm.
and I used journaling prompts that I have used in the past. I, was very mindful about which ones to include. And then when I got the book for the first time from the publisher, I chose to sit down and read it and really read it, fully engaged. And then I started using the journaling prompts, and I found it was so beautiful because it brought me into a deep place, even though it's something that cognitively I'm already very aware of. And so I think that it was almost like a kind of reinforcement for me of like, oh, I mean, this practice, it really is. The name is right. It really is flow journaling. So yeah, gosh, I mean, I'd love to hear from you, like how that is. I,
Yeah, no, definitely.
I
I
also
will
just
get
want to
hold of
reflect really, really quickly on what you just said about reading. So I
it.
remember distinctly as a child sitting on a windowsill in my bedroom, I mean, for hours and hours and hours reading, and my dad getting very cross about it because he couldn't see the value because I
Oh,
wasn't doing. And I can imagine also that, like, doing, as in like valid doing from his perspective. And whereas my mum's saying, no, this is such a wonderful thing. She's lost in the story, what an amazing place to be.
mm.
And just listening to you there, it was like, oh, gosh, yeah, these two ways of valuing this state of flow or not valuing this state of
Yeah,
flow.
true. Yeah, and being is exactly right. Like what you were sharing about what your mum was saying, about your being and you're learning to be engaged versus having to be doing something all the time. Yeah. And yeah, so yeah, we both seem to have enjoyed that experience of getting fully immersed in reading, and I think that's another thing that, like, academic life, I ended up always reading nonfiction, which was, interesting and useful, but not engaging. And it's like when I get back to reading fiction that I'm like, yeah, I can get immersed in.
And that it's okay. It's okay to
Yeah.
be lost in immersed. I mean, lost has got connotations, hasn't it? But immersed, yeah, in the story or in the task, it's a wonderful thing. So
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant, Sue. Honestly, I have just absolutely loved this conversation, and it's
Likewise, I have
oh,
too. They've lifted my day,
oh,
the end of my day, but it's been really enjoyable to obviously share across the world here, a shared love for this experience and like why it matters. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with your listeners about why I think it matters. And I hope that, they will also be interested to learn more themselves. And most of the time I find whenever I'm talking about flow, like, people don't always know, well, what it is as a psychological state, which I certainly didn't initially. But you start talking about this total engagement with what you're doing and dropping away self-consciousness and not worrying about failure and success, but just being totally process oriented. Like, people can connect with that, like the experience. And so what Mike Csikszentmihalyi has given us is a language around that and a way of understanding that, a framework for understanding that, and how, and like in my book, it's meant to be a practical book. It's meant to be about, well, what have I learned through working as a psychologist, and also through my research. I'm not trying to, like, um, be overly critical of research. It's really important. But what I've learnt about how we might be able to access it, and my stories and other people's stories in the book as well.
Mm. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I hope, like you say, that it's opened up a window or a pathway for people to think, oh, actually, it's okay to feel this feeling as well, because I think
Oh, yeah. It's not just okay, it matters,
it
you know?
really matters. It really matters, and that
Mm.
validation of that feels really important. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
thank
well,
you.
thank you very much. Been lovely to speak with you, Henny.
Yeah, really lovely. So there's a moment at the end of a recording with a guest where I pause and then we carry on chatting for a bit. And then I think, oh, I so wish I'd recorded that, because so much more richness has, unfolds. And yeah, I really loved that conversation with Sue. I think these are the my favorite kind of guest conversations, when they're far reaching and wide ranging and personal as well. And I really hope that listening to her has sparked your own curiosity. And um, her book is very accessible and really clearly lays out these 9 dimensions that she touched on, the 9 dimensions that Mike identified, um, and I just think that there's something really powerful about what she was saying, that flow is an absolutely necessary state. And one of the things that I'm sort of left with is, how often we can disregard the importance of flow in favor of some of these old patterns of thinking, these old stories, old ways of thinking about what success looks like, or what being goal driven looks like, or what hard work looks like. And actually inviting in this experience of flow may be something that really helps you, or others that shift some of those limiting thoughts, beliefs, and maybe enables you to find your own way of accessing what really gives you that space where time and effort cease to exist. So and also, of course, it may be that so much of what we've said has like really like resonated with you, and you've gone, oh yeah, like I get that. That's how I feel when I dot 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 fill in the gaps. So if that's the case, do come back to me. Do let me know what you've noticed about this experience of flow for yourself. I would love to hear. And yeah. Is there anything else I want to say? Oh, just one last thing, which is, if you don't already get the emails about these podcast episodes, if you haven't yet signed up to my mailing list, then please do. Um, the podcast now runs every fortnight, and you may have listened to the episode, whenever it was. I don't know when this one's going live, so I'm not sure what the difference is, how many weeks it's been, but you might have listened to the episode where I shared about the reason for sending the podcast live every fortnight rather than every week. And it was a way of breaking some of my own unwritten rules. And every other week from the podcast, I am now sharing a written reflection. And the emails come out on a Sunday. And there's something there to spark maybe your own curiosity, your own reflections, your own observations. And I write them. I understand actually even more now from having spoken with Sue. I write them from a state of flow myself. It always feels really important that when I'm communicating with you, that I'm right deep down in my belly in that place of compassionate wisdom. And, and hopefully that comes across in the words that I share. And as with everything, I would always love, I cherish your reflections. I love it when people write to me, and I will always respond. So do join the mailing list if you'd like to receive that. Just go on to the website hennyflynn.co.uk and let me know. And I'll also, there's a link in the notes. I feel like I'm rambling now. I'm gonna go. Got distracted. I'm out of flow. Oh, Sue. So much wisdom we have gathered from this conversation. So much knowledge. All right, my darlings. I send you a hug and a wave.